You're listening to the Product Coalition podcast with Jay Stansel. This is where product mastery happens. This is where careers are made. Welcome to the Product Coalition podcast. Let's go.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. I'm Jay Stansel, and today I'm genuinely excited because I'm doing something I rarely get to do on this show, and that is welcoming a guest back for a second time. Dave West is the CEO and product owner of Scrum.org. Before that, he was Chief Product Officer at TaskTop, Mick Kirsten's company that was acquired by PlanView in 2022. And before that, a research director at Forrester covering software and product development. Now, last time Dave was here, we talked about the Agile product operating model, how organizations can bridge the gap between Scrum and true product alignment. That conversation hit a nerve. Now, this time, Dave is back with something even more immediate. It's about how AI is becoming a genuine teammate for product managers and product owners, not a replacement, not a buzzword, but a working partner. And here is why this matters right now. There are millions of people practicing Scrum globally, and almost all of them are being asked the same question by their leadership. What are you doing with AI? Dave has been researching this directly at Scrum.org. So we're going to dig into three real threads today. First, what does AI as a teammate look like in practice when you're a PM or PO? Second, where is the line between what AI can do brilliantly and what still requires a human being in the room? And third, how does this change the way product teams organize and make decisions? Dave, it's brilliant to have you back. I'm excited for today's session. And from a human to human, I'm excited to get into a no AI, mixing up our words or preparing anything for us, and we're just going to talk through AI as a teammate, as two good humans should do.
That's right. Thank you for inviting me, Jay. It's great to be back.
Absolute pleasure, Dave. Now, I think it's almost a couple of years since we last spoke. Obviously, There's been an explosion of AI-based tools across the world. Last time we spoke, it was, as I mentioned, around the Agile operating model. 2 years have passed. Before we go into the details of AI as a partner, what's been happening in your world for the last couple of years as all of this has exploded around us?
It's funny you should ask. So we were talking about the Agile product operating model when we last spoke, about how organizations that were traditionally not aligned to product were becoming more product centric. It was definitely the wave after Agile transformation. They were like trying to move away from projects to product, to this different operating model. So I was talking to a lot of those organizations, and suddenly our conversation kind of took a right-hand turn. They said AI. I was like, okay. They were like, well, we've got to build everything with AI. We've got to lay off a third of our workforce and then build everything with AI. What does this mean? So that led me, because all these customers were doing it, all these companies were doing it, towards really trying to understand what is the impact of AI on those organizations. It's obviously changing the bottlenecks. It's changing the constraints on product delivery. If you've used Codex or you've used Claude Code, you know that you can build fabulous apps very quickly and incredibly effectively. But what about consumption? What about choices? What about governance? All of these things, how are they responding? So that's really where our research has been taking us. And where does Scrum feature? Scrum was very much created in a world where getting working product was incredibly hard. Building working product is easy now. Now, building working product that's legal, building working product that fulfills customers' need, building working product that doesn't go wrong in the middle of the night, building working product that is unhackable or secure, that's still incredibly hard, but getting to done is relatively easy. So where's Scrum going? And that's a question that obviously I've spent the last 18 months since we last talked, spent a lot of that time thinking about that.
Dave, what I find interesting about talking to you, I know you speak to much more than just product managers or product owners. I know you're out there interfacing with CTOs, CFOs, CEOs as well. AI has become such a relevant and powerful tool for so many professionals. Um, Based on your observations, why has that happened over the last couple of years since we last spoke, do you think?
I think there's obviously two fundamental things. Number one is the hype. I mean, you we're in a hype cycle. You can't argue with that. When companies are spending trillions of dollars on investing in this AI infrastructure, then of course they're going to be incredibly focused on encouraging people to use it. And I think, you'd be naive not to at least address that. But I do believe, so the second thing is really, I do believe that AI is going to be almost as fundamental as the printing press. Obviously, the printing press, came out of Germany, I think, Jay, in the, what was it, the 1500s or something. And it was the ability for effectively to print stuff. So it went from people handwriting to people being able to mass produce information. And that fundamentally changed, particularly European society. And you could argue the Reformation, the Age of Enlightenment, loads of wars, the guillotine, which we don't want to talk about, Le Miserable. All of these things came from the print. And I know there was a lot more than just the printing press. And I think AI is of that ilk. I don't know about you, Jay, but I use it extensively to help me do many things that I used to do manually, which was very frustrating. In fact, this morning we were just doing a reconciliation, financial reconciliation, and it's just, it used to take 4 hours, and now we can do it in 4 minutes. And what's even better is because it's there, all the data's there, we can then start asking it questions. And those questions then lead us to other trains of thought, and it's just an incredibly powerful tool. It's not perfect. It's not super smart, but it is incredibly useful. So I honestly believe that this technology for knowledge work is going to be as fundamental as Henry Ford was for mass production, for
Mhm.
factory work, and I think it's going to change everything. I really, really do believe that. Or it's going to create the ability for every single human being to be a super hacker, and then every system is continuously under threat, and we're going to spend our entire time trying to fix that. Which but I'm more of the optimistic side than the pessimistic side.
Well, you have to be. I mean, you've always got a smile on your face, Dave. So I don't doubt that. Um, so let's bring this down a level from the generic use case now into product management. Now,
Yeah.
product management often demands both this strategic vision, but also a tactical execution and oversight. With the businesses you're interfacing and with your research in mind, Dave, how are you seeing AI help product professionals managing this balancing act more effectively? We spoke a little bit there about efficiency, but effectiveness is a different word entirely. So, what are you seeing and hearing from your interactions?
So I'll be honest, Jay. I'm seeing that it's not helping as much as it could. I'm seeing most organizations actually just increasing the amount of stuff they're doing, not focusing it. I'm seeing very, very, very sophisticated presentations coming out of product professionals now, but not necessarily better decisions being made by those product professionals. I'm seeing still this huge amount of reactiveness, because the reality is, Jay, that balance between strategic and tactical basically means that most product professionals move from being very mindful or very strategic in what they do to being very reactive to the situation always. Oh my god, we've got to plan the next release, the next roadmap. We've got to present it to the board or to the execs or to the stakeholders, etc. Run around, run around, run around. Oh my god, we got the release is about to release. We've got to run around, run around, run around. And what AI seems to have done is it's increased the volume of those things, because the big warning is people upstream and downstream are using AI. So if you think downstream, which is where everybody's focused, software developers, test professionals, deployment, all of that stuff is definitely, that they're increasing the volume of the work that they do. And so because of that, they're coming to the product managers and product owners with more questions, more queries, more demos, more examples, etc. And then upstream, you've got these executives who are playing with AI themselves. So generating, hey, so I just took our website and I said to Claude, what would happen if I'm a Japanese businessman on a Friday and I'm looking at it? And that's a big market for us, Japan. And it said all these things that we're not doing. Why are we not doing them? And you're like, it's funny. My son has recently had a neuropsych, my eldest son, and I of course got the report from the school, all the data that they generate for the neuropsych. So I fed it into Claude, and then I went and spoke to the doctor that does the neuropsych, and I said, "Well, doctor, and I had all these things, and he looked at me and he goes, have you just used AI on that? And I'm like, yeah. and he was like so annoyed by me. And I became the most annoying customer in the world. And that's what's happening to product professionals. You've got executives going, all of this. You've got downstream going, you're like, so it's actually making it really hard for a product professional, product manager, product owner, whatever they're called, to manage this strategic vision to tactical execution, because noise has increased on both sides massively. So from and I'm seeing this over and over again. I mean, whether you call it burnout, cognitive overload, whether we can give it lots of trendy names. I'm also seeing it manifest in the artifacts that they create, the work products they create. They look fabulous, but when you push them, you just haven't actually spent the time with it. You're presenting, so this is our next, 6-month plan. These are our key milestones. And Claude's done it. And so when I say, hey, so why are we doing that? They go, because, and it's much harder for them. So I think it's a real challenge. And I think that what product professionals need to do is take control again, which is, don't get overloaded. Start having a boring, systematic plan, managing what the priorities are on what the most valuable thing is, responding to that executive saying, that's awesome, that's great, but let's just put that pin in that and come back to it, because this is our current focus. These are the goals that you set. And I think you almost have to sort of take control again. And I think that's a real concern, I think, for most product professionals.
Yeah, and I imagine it's hard for some executives on how to frame that, that they know they need to be leaning into AI, either from a shareholder perspective or an investor perspective, and driving productivity gains typically in the first instance, but at the same time, don't want to just create the slop that gets thrown around. And I think that the thing with the slop is that it's externally you're going to get critiqued on it. People will call you out on it publicly on social media or whatever. Internally, people hold back because there's political capital at stake. So it gets passed around, and it's almost this thing that isn't necessarily spoken about. And to your point, Dave, I feel that the organizations that are revisiting their values and their principles of how they operate and reinforcing what those should be for this new world, not necessarily keeping them to what they were, but revisiting them, are the ones that are going to really learn to leverage AI and not regret it. I feel that there's a lot of AI out there. The analogy I use, funny enough, with my family, is it feels like we're having a MySpace moment. We're all going to look back in 20 years where we all had a MySpace page. Some of us had more regrettable MySpace pages than others that were old enough to be around when MySpace was around. And I think we're going to look back and see a bit of a MySpace moment here, where there's some stuff that's out there on the internet. Some of our digital footprints are not quite as tidy as we wish they could have been when we look back in hindsight, to your point, because the ease of doing it versus some of the core principles of why should I be doing it are not quite found their balance yet. With that in mind, Dave, and you mentioned about your son, which there's nothing more important than the future of a child. Empathy and context are obviously two of the big things that AI really struggles with. That empathetic understanding, I don't just necessarily mean for a person, but for an organization, for an organization's culture, for a communication culture, for a founder's story, for a mission and a vision of a company. Having empathy for all of that is one thing. And then also trying to compress that could be weeks, months, or decades of history into a context window that essentially, to use an analogy, might need to fit on a floppy disk is quite hard for them to AI to do a good job. It's a bit like, for me, I think hiring someone and then day one asking them to set the new strategy for your product roadmap.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, Dave, with AI and empathy typically being the product owner's superpower, why can't AI replicate that from your perspective?
So I don't know if it can, honestly, Jay, but what you said was really interesting. When you start with AI, and we wrote a paper on this called Onboarding Your AI Teammate, which actually got a lot of pushback because AI aren't human, we got a lot of things like that, on social media. But what you said, I think, Jay, really hit it on the head. You expect AI to be super able from day one, and it doesn't have that context, right? It doesn't have that experience. It doesn't have that knowledge that you've accumulated over 5 years, 10 years, all those social cues from those meetings with stakeholders. Remember those where you go in and say, see, I think the product should do X, Y, Z. And they said yes, but 3 of them, because of the way they sat, because of their position, because of their lack of engagement, weren't actually bought into it. So those that you remember that, and then when you go back on changes, you talk to them first outside of that big group. AI doesn't know any of that. So I think over time, ultimately, you can start helping AI help you make better choices. You can ask it to remind you of things. You can ask it to highlight things that are important. But to do that, you have to start taking a much more systematic approach to context. They talk about product managers and product owners owning context and building up context and managing context for their products. And I think that is something that increasingly, either through themselves or through their teammates, their human teammates, or maybe their AI teammates as well, who knows, managing that context is incredibly valuable, because you can't, well, one, AI isn't at every single meeting, and we aren't using the Zuckerberg glasses yet, to my knowledge. Maybe you are, Jay, because you're far more techie than maybe I am. But we're not capturing every single insight, so we have to help the AI make decisions. And the other thing is, I'm not sure AI is that good at judgment yet. It's very good at prediction, which is ultimately making predictions based on what, the sum of all human knowledge based on the internet. It builds these vector databases based on that, and then it uses prediction to determine the outcome. But judgment is a lot more than prediction. It's millions of years of evolution. When Lucy in Africa came down and started walking upright, that experience is in our bones, right? And that's what determines judgment. And AI hasn't got that. Now, can it? I think it will at some point make judgment calls, but today it really hasn't got it. So that means you have to be very aware that the information, and sometimes it overwhelms you. You end up going, oh yes, well, AI told me to do that, so I'm going that way. But again, in the same way as basically managing your inbox in a more effective way, you have to step back and go, okay, so what are we trying to achieve? Who are the humans that this is going to impact? What are we? Why are we doing this? Why are we here? What are our values? And that judgment ultimately, I think, still has to come from human beings. And the other important point is, currently, now obviously we have some legal cases running at the moment. I think there's one in Florida. AI isn't suable. So at the end of the day, whatever decisions are made, you can't say, but AI told me.
Hmm.
It's you making that decision, whether it's, some sort of advice that you're providing on your financial services website, or whether it's a decision-making algorithm on your self-driving car. The decisions that you're making, the judgment that you're exerting has to be defensible, because you are the person that's ultimately accountable, not the AI.
Yeah, and I think that word accountable is the piece that is being discounted a little bit right now by people. They're accepting too much of the plausibility of AI responses
Yeah.
and putting that out there, and then only later on appreciating the accountability that comes by putting that out there is the same as putting your own words out there from an accountability, and that will affect your internal political capital as much
Yeah.
as your external professional brand, side by side. Dave, I want to touch on some of the practical product professional use cases you're seeing and hearing. I'm not quite sure how to best phrase this question, but I'd love to get, if I think about an idea pre-discovery, it's written on the, well, back when we used to write things on the back of study cards and blue tack them to a wall, written on the back of a Claude AI card, and all the way through to in-product market assessment, reviewing how the feature's going or how the product's going. Across that spectrum, what are some of the key standout points on that process for you as to some of the real life practical ways you're seeing product owners and professionals use AI to either reduce that cognitive load, which, as you say, can also increase the cognitive load if it's getting too noisy, but also increase the value of delivery?
Yeah, it's funny. So we recently, it wasn't that recently, it's over a year now, but we had a class, we launched a class, and we used the stances of product ownership to sort of like create spaces to focus AI usage. So one of the stances, visionary. Obviously, AI is a great tool, and I use it. This is something I use it a lot on, helping to shape and communicate a vision. Not only to build those vision documents, that used to take ages, because you'd obviously be Googling, okay, what's that canvas that I want, and you'd be going to all these different sites to get some good examples of elevator pitches and the like. What I find is AI, obviously, no surprise, is incredibly good at bringing this information together, but it's also good at critically reviewing stuff. I'm increasingly building what I describe as a series of very funny personas. I've got this so obviously in the Scrum community, we have some what you describe as methodologists, and I mean that in the nicest possible way. And they're like curmudgeon-y, they're just so annoying. And so I say, for instance, oh, we're launching this class on this. Well, in 1987, the vision document was never described by that. And you've got to remember, they always come up with that kind of rubbish, right? I mean, not that it's rubbish. So if any of you are listening now, it's very interesting and insightful. So I've built these personas in agents, and I use them to critically review my vision. Because it's just so powerful. I mean, do they always get it right? No. Are there something? But there's occasionally where you're like, that's actually useful. I've never thought of it like that. And that's good. But you have to be explicit, and you have to use words like curmudgeon and
Right.
annoyingly verbose, and, somebody that always looks at history first, that kind of stuff,
Right.
because then AI actually does it. And it's
Hmm.
just like, oh my God, golly gosh. Then the other thing that I find in the vision space is, obviously, we've always traditionally taken a vision and presented it, PowerPoint, or that kind of stuff. Sometimes you've used a whiteboard. Obviously, if you're at Amazon, you have to write it on a sheet of paper. But you've always presented it in one media. Now we all know, and I'm dyslexic, so I consume information in quite a different way from perhaps you, Jay. You know, I find visuals are very good, diagrams are awesome. That's how I consume. Music is handy. Anyway, not going that far, but so using different tools to present the vision in different media and different format can really present it to people in different ways. The other great thing is, like, for instance, we have a regular internal podcast on vision, using Notepad LM and stuff like that. So people, when they're walking or doing their exercise, can listen to it instead of people having to go to a presentation. So that's just an example, and that's the vision stance, or the visionary stance. The other thing that's really interesting, though, and I think perhaps, and this is something that's going to grow massively. I don't know, Jay, if you've ever worked with real-time embedded systems development, people that are building rockets and people that are building, cars and all this stuff. They do simulation because it's incredibly expensive to launch a rocket, right? So they do simulation. And they're very focused on this. In fact, I was talking to a Formula One team, which I spent most of my time just dribbling because I was like, this is so exciting. I was chatting to them, yeah, because they are so cool. There's over 1,000 people working on each car. Isn't that crazy? I mean, I'm like, wow. And all those people are cool. Anyway, so I was chatting to them and they're like, well, aerodynamics is the most important thing on a car. And I'm sure I was chatting to the person that was in charge of aerodynamics. And he was telling me about how much simulation and how much stuff they do. Well, I actually think simulation or experimentation is going to be perhaps the most important, valuable tool that a product professional can use AI for. So we use Salesforce Marketing Cloud. I'm sure many of you do. The ability to take a demand, some sort of campaign, and test it based on the experience of previous campaigns, and then to be able to then run that campaign. And as soon as it starts moving out of those key indicators, whether that's click-throughs, whether that's open rates, whether that's, you then can take the actual real campaign and change it, but you can make decisions before in the I think imagine we're putting a new just a new button on our finance website, our banking app. We can simulate based on how other people have used it, what will happen next, and then we can make better choices based on that. And then when we execute, when we deploy it, we can do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, testing on it, compare that with and see which thread of the simulation we're going to. I think simulation is going to become a lot more mainstream. It's going to move just, not just for physical systems like rocket ships or Formula One cars, but also to actually, human systems, like whether people are clicking on, pages on your app, etc. So I think experimentation, yes, we're using vibe coding now to do demos, to experiment with ideas and to get feedback. But imagine experimentation taken to that next level, where you actually, before you take it to a real human being who is bandwidth constrained, you test it in this virtual environment. And yes, the more philosophical of us may say maybe we're a simulation and that this is just a virtual environment where somebody's testing some ideas. It's probably not going that well, is it? So they're probably thinking, what are these idiots doing? But no, but just think of simulation as a key opportunity for a product professional, because assuming that consumption doesn't change, and obviously it will when everybody's agent is managing choices for them, but at the moment that isn't the case. But assuming that, your users and your stakeholders can only consume so much, we need to be a lot more mindful of what we're putting in front of them. So that means that tools like simulation, sort of like vibe coding on steroids, is definitely the new frontier for product professionals.
And for myself, Dave, that That really excites me. So what's funny is, funny enough, I was at the American consulate recently getting a visa. And one of the questions is, what is it about you that makes you special? I said, well, back in 2016, 17, I spent about 3-4 months completing my Microsoft certification in artificial intelligence. And for pretty much the last 8 years since then, that followed that, no one really cared about that. And only in the last 2-3 years, obviously, that's become a very interesting tool and skill for me to bring to the industry. But what you're talking about to me is what classical machine learning is all about. It's about classification models, regression models. It's
Yeah.
about statistics. It's about algorithms. And where I find that so many product managers are caught up, they're caught up in so much of the how do I get this thing to write words for me, instead of how do I get this thing to run proven models. And some of these models might go back 30 years in computer science that are still the go-to model for forecasting or predicting a change or an outcome. And it's so overlooked, but it's so accessible. Any product manager could go and ask their AI to consume a model, which historically used to require a data scientist that was very expensive.
Not anymore.
And there weren't many of them around because they all had to have PhDs and pay off their PhDs, which made them expensive. And then the tech stack that they needed to run their Python scripts and their large data sets on was incredibly expensive. And now everyone's got access to anywhere from $500,000 to $1 million worth of data science, research, and engineering tools, all locked in within their LLMs that could go and run Python-based models for this quantitative analysis. And so few people are doing that. Instead, they're using it to rewrite their LinkedIn headline or to produce their OKR report. And, yes, some of that is freeing up your time. But what are you doing to take advantage of those incredible technologies around machine learning that have been there for decades that could truly differentiate your product?
And the point that you said, Jay, that's so important is you don't have to know about this stuff.
No.
Not really.
No.
You have to ask questions, and you have to ask questions in a certain way. So the questions that I ask are, okay, so this is a new class we're developing. How can we build a model that helps me determine whether people will go to this class? For instance, I'm just using that as an example. And it will say, well, actually, that's a really interesting, they always says that's a really interesting question. I'm not sure it's ever said, what's going to shock us all. It's one day we'll know it's gone sentient when it goes, well, that was a stupid thing to ask. And you'll be like, what's happened? But anyway, and then you get into this interesting conversation about how you can build a model that simulates consumption, for instance. And then you can start saying, okay, so what are the key factors? Okay, well, let's look at jobs in this space. Are they going up? Are they going down? Oh, let's look at what's BCG doing and McKinsey and it can build all this very quickly. And some of it will highlight the assumptions that you're making about the class, or in this example, or whatever product you're building. And some of it will be really an interesting journey into that sort of predictive simulation analytics stuff without you having to use tools like SPSS and the like, because they're not usable by human beings. But you can suddenly build these little models and simulate. And then that allows you to make better choices about what you take to this very finite resource of actually the people that are going to use it and actually the people that are going to pay for it, the stakeholders. And they're bandwidth constrained. So if you can improve what you take to them, then I think you're in a much better position.
Where I've been, and it's such an obvious thing. So I put out a post recently. It was just a note out on Substack, but mentioned the pre-mortem.
Yeah.
Conduct a pre-mortem. Just put together a simple pre-mortem prompt, just like us humans used to do in a workshop, and sit back and see what it says. Why is this not going to work? Why is this going to fail? And it's some of those simple human tactics, ceremonies, strategies that are being, people are going so fast that they're losing the quick wins, such as a pre-mortem prompt to identify where something could fail or slip up or go wrong. And the upside to that is tokens. Like, you're not going to waste 2, 3, 10, 20 grand's worth of tokens on building the thing that ended up, proving true from a pre-modern perspective. Because that is the other thing that product managers and the product community is now facing is, yes, there's new boundaries of, intellect with artificial intelligence, but there's also new cost models that are coming with that. And we've never had to really, obviously moving to the cloud came with a compute cost that none of us could really forecast well at the start. But we're back there again now with AI. Dave, looking ahead, do you see the relationship between AI and product ownership now evolving? And if so, when we're sitting down again in another couple of years, mate, what are we going to be talking about? Where would it have got to, do you think?
And that's a really hard question to answer, Jay, as you can, because when we were talking 18 months ago, I couldn't predict the level of capability that's currently sitting on my desktop through Claude or whatever tool of your choice. So it's incredibly hard to predict the future. But what I do see is this relationship between AI and knowledge workers, product owners, product professionals growing. And I see really the owner taking more accountability and responsibility coupled, but using AI more and more. They're building their little team and they're building this capability. What's interesting is, as I'm using AI, I was thinking, what happens if I got fired tomorrow? But by the way, that I'm not planning on being fired, but all of this context that I've accumulated in my Claude and my skills that I've developed and all these things, well, I'm going to lose them because they're here in organization. So I think that's also a very interesting thing, because as a product professional, I'm accumulating these capabilities, and suddenly the line between me and AI is a little blurry with respect to the context that it's using, the experience that it's bringing in, the models, the skills that I've developed myself for to exploit, the examples that it's got. It uses, for instance, it uses all my blogs. When I write a blog, one of the things that has always been a problem with me, I'm like, have I written this before? And there's no way I'm reading all my blogs. So I use obviously I've got a blog skill that checks and says, well, hang on a minute, maybe this is a bit, how about you actually say this is based on this work you did before? I'd forgotten I did that, but that disappears. So I think product professionals are going to get a lot smarter in knowing how to package that stuff up and carrying it around with them. I see that. I see simulation as a key skill that we're going to be using a lot more of, explicitly using these predictive models to make better choices. I'm going to see. I think that ultimately, the vibe coding thing. Yeah, I think that's less interesting than the use of simulation and modeling. I think that's it. I also think that the strategic impact of products and or capabilities that we're building, being able to evaluate this and have much more intelligent conversations is going to obviously increase. But so when you say, what does a product professional look like in 2 years' time? I think that you see somebody that is very capable in using the tools that AI provides to effectively deliver more value and to do it in a way that supports their skills development and their portfolio capability, and being able to sort of step back from the day-to-day and make good strategic choices about where they're spending the time. I think that's our future. Ultimately, this is an amazing tool. And, just like the printing press, basically allowed everybody to be writers instead of those few scribes. I think that this is a similar tool, but in the same way as it allowed rubbish writers to write, and it had allowed Shakespeare to write and all these amazing writers to write, that those Shakespeare's it's going to elevate them so much more than people that can't. So I think that ultimately AI is an accelerator for both good and bad. And if you're bad at your job, it's going to be even more apparent. If you're good at your job, I think you're going to be even better, in
Amazing,
my opinion.
amazing. Dave, I'm gonna finish up. If I was a radio show host, I'd play a jingle now, and it would be called Dave's philosophical moment. I got you mentioned methodologists earlier. I got a few quick fire questions, and we'll keep them quick fire because I appreciate there's going to be lots of perspectives on this that you mentioned. My first question for you is coming back to the Agile Manifesto. Does that need a refresh for an AI world? What would be your 30-second answer on that one?
Uh, yes, it probably does, but no, it won't happen.
Okay. Sprints typically a couple of weeks, but velocity to move through points can be so much quicker now. Does the cadence of circling back and reviewing what we've learned and what we've delivered need to change when we're looking at an average? I mean, you would know numbers much better than me, probably of a 2-week sprint.
So yes, on average, most sprints are 2 weeks, but remember the constraint is actually not because of the ability to build product, it's the ability to review product. So ultimately, if you can get your stakeholders in a room on a daily basis to review progress that you're making, you could move to daily sprints. I think that human beings still need a cadence that's consistent and ultimately gives a rhythm for the organization. So I think you still need some cadence in your organization, but it can be a lot shorter than 2 weeks.
Would you say that also at a OKR or quarterly OKR level, that loop could also shorten, knowing that really OKRs were tied back to Victorian accounting practices of measuring things every 3 months? Do you foresee that could shorten as well as a loop?
I think it's all about the consumption, who's
Right.
there, who's available. And obviously, if your product's being consumed by human beings, they take some time. I know, for instance, on my business, I can review data instantly. However, the importance of quarters is still there. Because it irons out when public holidays are, when people are going to be consuming product, when people are going to be reading stuff on the website. So I think that one thing it does allow us to do is to step back and say, why is this quarterly? Does this make sense anymore? What is the cadence of our consumers, our customers? What is the cadence of the people that are investing? Like imagine trying to get your VC, if you're, a VC funded organization, imagine getting them more than every quarter. They're very busy people, they've got golf tournaments to go to and the like. um, so I think you have to you can question these things and then you build a cadence that's right for you. But I do feel that organizations still need that cadence.
Okay. And then last one for me, Dave. This one was written on the back of a napkin and no one ever really wrote it down. But the idea of a 2-pizza team being a great sized team, where are we at on that?
I think it depends on the pizza. But it's funny, I was just talking to Amazon and they're going to, excuse me, a 1 pie team now. It's funny, the team size I think has still got some ironing out, because I was talking to a large bank the other day and they've reduced the number of teams, but they've increased the size of those teams just a little bit. And the reason why is because dependencies cross team are incredibly challenging to resolve, much easier to resolve into the team. So what they've done is they've brought a lot of those experts on those systems into one team. It's still smaller than, it's still only 15, 16 people. It's not 20 people. And they've got rid of 3 or 4 teams to do that. I think, though, realistically, that teams are going to shrink in size over time. But we've still got a lot of learning to do there, Jay. I think, we've got to work out exactly what skills, what competencies, and what experience we need in a team. And that's going to vary. The constraint of delivery is no longer there, but the constraint of judgment, knowledge, governance, and consumption is still there. So there's going to be some playing with that, I think.
Fantastic. Dave, I really appreciate your time, your experience, your war stories from what you're seeing and hearing out there, and bringing that research from scrum.org into the podcast. Thank you so much again for joining me on the podcast.
Well, thanks for inviting me as always. It's always great to come, and hopefully we'll talk before another 18 months. But if we don't, I'll be very excited to hear what we talk about in 18 months.
Yeah, we should place a bet on that and place a $5 and see where we land. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dave. For the audience listening, thank you as well for joining myself and Dave West from scrum.org. If you'd like to learn more about Scrum, head over to scrum.org, or for Product Coalition, it's over at productcoalition.com. Until the next episode, thank you very much.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of the Product Coalition podcast, hosted by Jay Stansel. Got questions or want to explore more topics? Connect with Jay on LinkedIn or join the ever-growing Product Coalition community on Substack. Thanks for listening.